My parents gave me the space that I needed to become curious about the natural world and about physics.
I was interested in science all my life. And when I was 10 years old, I found nuclear science.
I think the mystique of it, the power of it, and of course the fact that I grew up in a nuclear town. I lived in Oak Ridge, Tennessee until I was 11 years old.
There's so much energy locked up. That just was always fascinating to me. And when I was 10 years old, I found something that I really was passionate about. I thought was really, really cool. And you know, it was something that could make a difference. And I think that those three things, when they kind of came together, I was like, this is what I'm sticking with.
We were surrounded constantly by the activities of the lab. All of the news was dominated by things that happened at the lab. This permeated the talk of the town, if you will, as I was growing up. And so I sort of absorbed this and became interested in it, wanted to participate.
Get a picture of that. Ow!
Well, my parents, they didn't support everything I did. I mean, when I got into high voltage electricity and explosives and things like that in my middle school years, my mother was not always right there supporting those activities. My dad took me, I think it was my 13th birthday, he took me up to Richmond, Virginia to meet Richard Hull, who was a great mentor to me in the Tesla coil community. And Richard had built this huge Tesla coil that threw 15-foot sparks in his laboratory. Got to see these giant arcs climb up into the rafters of Richard's laboratory, and embers were raining down.
Let's take a look at some of what we can find here.
I've been interested in nuclear tourism since my days in Oak Ridge. I was limited in mobility as a child, but now that I'm not limited in mobility, I've gone some pretty interesting places. I've been to Chernobyl 4 times. I'll probably go a 5th time this year. It's November 17th, 2016, and we're on our way westbound in Chernobyl's deaerator corridor, this gold-paneled hallway on the 10-meter elevation. We are going to try to ride the elevator up to plus 20 meters where the central hall is located. And that may not be the best idea, because it is a beater. I've been to the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site in Kazakhstan, which is where the Soviet Union tested their first nuclear weapon and many, many subsequent ones. I've been to the National Nuclear Center in Almaty in Kazakhstan, and they have a very nice Soviet nuclear reactor there and an isotope production facility. I've been to all 3 Manhattan Project sites here in the United States, finally. I've been to the former site of the Chicago pile at the Redgate Woods site in Chicago. That is a fascinating site because of the archaeology that is still there. You can still find pieces of reactor graphite on the ground out in the woods where the Chicago pile was rebuilt. I have been to interesting nuclear sites pretty much throughout the country, large and small, research reactors, nuclear power plants. I've been in 5 or 6 nuclear power plants here in the USA. Many, many radiochemistry laboratories and research reactors.
We're at the site of a Soviet nuclear explosion on the Balapan test site.
Nuclear tourism is a real thing. Nuclear archaeology is a real thing. We're now far enough into the development of this type of technology that there's people are recognizing the historical significance of some of these sites. And we're moving from an idea that these sites are places nobody should ever go to being places that have a story to tell.
Spasibo, spasibo. This is incredible.
No, actually, we're trying to send as much away as we can.
Although the commercial disposal sites are places all over the West.
I have never been to Hanford here in Washington. And this was the 3rd big part of the Manhattan Project. This is where plutonium was produced. This was a factory site, essentially, for production of plutonium on an industrial scale.
Whatever your opinion of the use of the atomic bombs in World War II, I mean, there's no doubt that the atomic bombs and the Manhattan Project were one of the greatest scientific and technical achievements that this country and the world has ever seen. It was an incredibly intensive, impressive effort to make a reality something that the physics was only discovered a short time before the project began.
Well, I came here to Hanford to see the B-Reactor, look at this one Manhattan Project site that I haven't yet been to, but I also got to meet Sara Schreiber, who is the daughter of Dr. Raymer Schreiber. She is a person who was born in Los Alamos during the war years, and her birth certificate actually points out that she was born at P.O. Box 1663 in Santa Fe. And this, of course, was the code name for Los Alamos before it had the name of Los Alamos.
Being involved in a project on Dr. Schreiber is just incredibly inspiring. He really fundamentally had a hand in altering the course of human events. You know, really pioneered the field that I'm now involved in.
That feeling is really indescribable. It's a very empowering feeling and one that makes a person feel especially relevant. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to meet Sara and to hear some of her stories from the early years in Los Alamos and hear about her father and, you know, hear her thoughts on what has happened with the legacy of his life and times.
This is one of the big three Manhattan Project sites. There were numerous sites that made up the Manhattan Project, but the bomb was designed at Los Alamos. The uranium for Little Boy was produced at the Oak Ridge site in Tennessee, and the plutonium, which, keep in mind, had just been discovered, and within the course of literally months, we're getting the capability to produce kilogram quantities of this material. An element that did not exist on Earth prior to our creation of it was produced here at this site in the reactors in the processing plants.
Thanks so much.
So I came prepared to B-Reactor, and one of the big motivations for me as somebody interested in radioactive environments is the thrill of the hunt. And I don't know where I really caught the thrill of the hunt. I think it's one of these sort of primordial things that is built into the human psyche. But whatever it is we're hunting, whether we're hunting elk or deer or radioactive material, you still get that sense of your heart rate climbing and your hand shaking when you're getting close to something good. And so I came out to B-Reactor with a scintillation detector, and actually the other people I brought along as well had good instrumentation as well. We hit the ground running. As soon as we got to B-Reactor, we were out the door of that vehicle and Geiger counters on and scintillators clicking away. We are at the charge face of the B-Reactor, which was the first production reactor for plutonium here in the United States. And behind me are a bunch of pressure tubes that run horizontally through a graphite block, and they carry water and they carry nuclear fuel, which is natural uranium for the most part in this reactor. And U-238 in that fuel is transmuted by neutron bombardment into plutonium-239 by way of neptunium, and the fuel is discharged after a fairly low burnup into storage pool that lies behind the graphite block. And then the cooling water is sent back out, just open circuit back out into the Columbia River, where it discharges that heat to the environment as the ultimate heat sink. The plutonium goes on to T-plant or to the other canyons where it's processed for its plutonium values. That's how this place works.
From the Mutual Newsroom in New York, Tokyo Radio says acceptance of Potsdam Proclamation coming soon. I repeat, Tokyo Radio says acceptance of Potsdam Proclamation coming soon.
The Japanese offer of unconditional surrender is official. It has been accepted.
You've heard it, ladies and gentlemen, and we're here in the Time Star newsroom with a traveling microphone. The war is over. The Japanese have surrendered.
I think he was proud of being able to work on a major project that had a direct impact on ending the war. I think he was very happy to be a member of the team. He was a man that didn't have much of an ego. So I think he was flattered in some respects that he got to work with Fermi and Oppenheimer and Beta and people of that ilk. He came, because he came from a farm life and he came from a Germanic family, so being self-aggrandizing was not part of the family. As he has said ad nauseum, he could see all of the people that were about to be launched to Japan. And so indirectly, he saved a lot of lives. He understood that it was a very unique time in his life and in history. And to be part of it was extremely pleasing to him.
President Harry Truman has announced the end of the war. The Japanese have accepted our conditioned reply to their surrender offer.
This is where the spent fuel is, out these windows. So fuel that was discharged out of the reactor went underwater, and then they would put it in pails, essentially. And under the wooden platform out there is where they would store that fuel underwater, allow it to decay a little bit before it went off to be processed for plutonium.
For me, I mean, a lot of it's interesting. Of course, you know, the signatures of the history, the radioactive signatures are very interesting. But where we're sitting now, the control room of B-Reactor, this was the first operational full-scale nuclear reactor in history. The first one with a purpose, which was to produce, you know, large quantities of this man-made element, plutonium. So for me, this building is incredibly historically interesting, incredibly important in the history of the world. I mean, if you look at it, you know, the course of human events were fundamentally changed by the material that was produced in this building that went into the Trinity test in New Mexico and of course was used over Japan with Nagasaki. So this place fundamentally changed the course of human history in a way that few other places can kind of have a similar testament to.
And we'll pull a spectrum on it.
They'll do your yearly surveys for you.
Yeah, I know.
I did them already.
He's
you know?
taking care of them.
Yeah.
They'll do them for free.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I gotta get a picture of this.
Yeah. Only as long as we're allowed to keep our souvenirs, you know.
When I talk about having our counters out, I'm talking about places that are cordoned off in this building. The publicly accessible areas now, they've polished the heck out of them, and they are painted in the original color scheme, and the floors are clean, and the place has been curated incredibly carefully with respect to safety. The one thing that I think they probably fail on, just for general public, is bathrooms. The whole thing has been disconnected from water service. Radiation is a non-issue, but if you have to use the bathroom, you may have to, you know, really think about your options.
So right here, pig, and it's going back up. So you can see a log of activity.
We're going to go to the, anybody want to go to the top, or are we good on this side of the reactor?
It may not strike people as being particularly profound until they realize that the technology that B-Reactor embodies was not even known to science 5 years before it got started. This is something that went from a pilot scale plant in Oak Ridge to being production scale facilities in Hanford within a year, essentially. The new science that was learned even while building and operating the Hanford B-Reactor was just profound. Everybody who goes into nuclear engineering now learns typically in their first year in a course about phenomena like xenon poisoning. And this was unknown when B-Reactor was built. This was an effect that only occurs to a measurable extent in the highest power systems, you know, coming from Chicago Pile, which ran at 400 watts maximum, to B-Reactor, which ran at hundreds of megawatts. The DuPont engineers were absolutely brilliant. They had enough space in that core that they could overcome the negative reactivity of xenon by simply using more pressure tubes. And As it was an over-designed system that was built without even knowing what it was being over-designed for, and it turned out to work very, very well.
Here we go, right?
Oh my gosh, look at that. So this is where Dad's plutonium came from.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
I just think it's amazing that anybody can even know how to make something like this.
And they did it with slide rules.
Oh, I know. Benjamin still has Dad's slide rule.
Is that right?
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
You know, Schreiber worked extensively, as you know, on nuclear
Yes.
reactors.
Yes,
and
he did.
exotic types, the rocket engine reactors, which were graphite moderated
Right.
reactors, but designed for
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was really pleasantly surprised by this site because while it has been attended to with respect to human safety, it has not been destroyed in the sense that all of the signatures of what happened there have been purged. We actually found a number of interesting radiation signatures with our instruments, and they paint a clear picture of what happened in different places in the building. So we found cobalt-60 in a drain, for instance, that's in the floor of the control rod drive room. I mean, for me, that's what makes it real. We also enjoyed going places in the building that, at least to me, felt like we were breaking down some barriers. But we were actually given what felt like unprecedented access to certain areas, like the top of the nuclear reactor, or the experimental area on the side of the reactor, or the fuel discharge face. We got to go in there, and I think we did sort of expand some of our boundaries by pushing into those places. We elicited some stories from the guys who were showing us around by going there. If we hadn't gone there, we wouldn't have heard about, for example, the broom handles being used to push spent fuel slugs off of the nozzles at the rear face of the reactor. The site just has so many stories to tell, and whether you're in the areas that they currently allow the public to see or whether you're in some of the other areas. But some of those behind the scenes areas really should be open to the public too, in my opinion, because the stories there are fantastic as well. A lot of pioneering reactor science did happen in this production facility. This was designed to be a factory, and yet a lot was actually learned here at B-Reactor.
And preserving that history is incredibly important, both in the personal stories of the people, you know, the hundreds of thousands of people involved to make, you know, this technology a reality, but also, you know, where it took the world.
The level of historical preservation, the level of intactness of that whole site, I was thinking that it would be a lot more sanitized for what they perceive to be important to a popular audience, but there was a lot to capture my attention there. I was in awe of the structure there and what has happened there and what is left for us to see today. Ready?
Ready. Okay. I've got my scintillation detector, and it's currently measuring about 2,000 counts per minute. This is background. Right behind us over this way is something that's going to tickle this scintillator a little bit. So let's go take a look. We're coming up on about 3,000 counts per minute right where I'm standing right now. And now we're going to keep walking. And we're walking over in this direction. There's 4,000 counts per minute. Still walking. 5,000 counts per minute. Oh wow, 6, 7, 8, 9. Here's 10,000 counts per minute. Now I have to change the instrument to the next scale because it's nice and hot right here. So we're gonna keep walking. There's 20,000 counts per minute. 40,000 counts per minute. 100,000 counts per minute. And I don't think my instrument will go too much higher. It looks like we're at 200, 250?
Is the cameraman going to lose his ability to touch children?
No, it's very unlikely that you'll go sterile from, see, that's what's called a deterministic effect, and that requires a lot of radiation. What we have is just very mild levels of radiation, and what this is a tank car that was used to transport the discharged fuel from the B-Reactor so that it could be taken over and processed to have the plutonium extracted from it. And so they would get the fuel out of the reactor, it would sit here at the reactor for a few months to cool down, and then it would be transported by rail in these cars. And what we've determined that all this radiation here, all this gamma radiation is from cesium-137, a long-lived fission product. It's really just coming from residues that are clearly in the bottom of the car. You know, we're not that hot up here, but when we come down here, we're very hot. So clearly this is due to stuff that's been settling down in the car. And as you can see, they've got it, you know, it's appropriately placarded in places, and there's this nice yellow and magenta rope that I've actually violated to bring the detector close to the car. But this is it. This is radioactive material in the place that made it. It's just a little bit of cesium. So good times. Of course, we can detect it with the scintillator from a pretty good distance off, and then, you know, we follow the scintillator to where it is. It's sort of our hunting hound, and it takes us exactly where we want to go, which is where the hot stuff is.